it's Fail and welcome to part number 0 of my Worbla bracer tutorial where I teach you how to make a piece of armor like this. In part number 1 I show you the understructure and how I created it out of Worbla, and in part number 2 I showed you how to shape the Worbla, and I'm going to need a couple questions about what exactly I mean when I say that I just cut and tape pieces of paper together to create my patterns. So I wanted to kind of give you guys an insight into what I'm thinking and why I'm doing what I'm doing, and hopefully inspire you guys to work on your own patterns the same way. So please enjoy, and I will see you for part number 1, 2, and 3 in the future. Okay. So I kind of wanted to show you how I went ahead and made the pattern. I talked a little bit about it in part 1 of the tutorial, but I wanted to kind of elaborate because I've had a couple questions on it. So I just kind of want to show you how I derived this pattern to get this bracer eventually into Worbla. It's pretty simple, so this is going to be pretty quick. You need a piece of paper, writing utensil, some tape, and some scissors, and you basically need a little bit of a reference to know what your eventual piece of armor is going to look like. A lot of the time you can get away with just wrapping if you're trying to make a bracer that's like close to your skin, that's just kind of a smooth bracer, you can just get away with wrapping your arm in some masking tape. Normally you'll do saran wrap first so that it doesn't stick, and then masking tape, and then just draw the lines on that you want, cut it out, and then unroll it and you have a pattern. But for something like this bracer that's going to be a little bit three-dimensional, as you can see it's not completely shaped to my wrist, I'm going to do something a little bit different to kind of get the shape that I want. So basically I'm just going to start with a piece of paper. Normally I use a piece of scrap paper, like a piece of newspaper or junk mail. I'm going to use some white paper today to show you guys because it's easier to see the lines that I make. So basically you can see that this piece of paper is about the size of my forearm, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half because this particular piece of armor that I'm making is symmetrical, so I only really have to focus on one half of the pattern, because once I have one half of the pattern like that, I can just flip it over to duplicate it onto the other side. So I don't need to work on multiple pieces of the pattern. I can just work on the one piece and make sure that that's how I want it. So I'm going to fold it in half, and basically I know that I'm going to wear the bracer on my wrist, and I'm going to make 2 marks right here. I want the bracer to be about at my wrist, so I'm going to make a mark at my wrist, and I want it to be at about my elbow. So I'm going to make a mark right around where my elbow is. So there, I have the 2 marks, so I know how long I'm making my bracer. So I can just go ahead and shorten the paper if I want. I will for simplicity. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure where I want it. So basically I know that I want it to be about halfway down my arm. So I'm going to bend the paper around my wrist to where I think it's going to be. I'm going to put it right about here. That's about halfway on my wrist. It's about the line where my pinky meets the tip of my pinky comes down and meets my wrist. So I'm going to put a mark right here. And then I'm going to set that paper back and continue to wrap it around my arm and follow that line, and right about there. It's about halfway on my elbow. So I'm going to put a mark right here, and I'm going to connect those marks. So perfect. There is the base of our pattern. I'm going to give a little bit of a seam allowance because I know that I'm going to have to make some adjustments, and it's easier to take away paper than it is to add paper. So I'll just go ahead and leave a little bit of an edge there, and as you can see I have a basic bracer pattern. I could turn this into a Worbla bracer, I could lace it up the middle here, it'd be perfect. But I don't want to stop there. I want to continue moving on to a shape more like this one. So I'm going to show you how I kind of get that. So I want to basically, I want to make sure that I have these ridges. So I'm going to bisect this about I don't like that line. Maybe this line. This is a better line. And of course this is just really quick, so it's not going to be the exact same pattern, but it's going to be really, really close. This is pretty much what I did in order to create this pattern. So I have this line that I bisected it at, and I'm going to create the shape at the bottom and a more drastic shape at the top. So actually I kind of want it to be kind of sloping downwards like this. I don't want it to be a full bracer. I want it to have more of a curve, so I'll go ahead and trim that off. And then I will redraw my points. Yeah, that's more like it. And then kind of the same thing at the bottom. I want kind of this shape here, so I'll go ahead and trim that off. The reason why I'm giving it this curve is it'll just give it a more pointed look to it when it's completed. So I just want to make sure that I preserve the shapes that I created in the tutorial. So that's pretty much what I have here. So I'll go ahead and cut that out. Alright, so now I have something that looks kind of like that. As you can see, now it looks kind of like a spiky bracer. This one's a little bit shorter. You just need to guess and test so you can experiment. If you already know that it's shorter, you can just go ahead, slice it in half, add a second paper, elongate it. In fact, maybe I'll just go ahead and do that now so you guys can see. So I'll slice it in half, I'll add just like a ½ an inch there and tape it together. Trim it down a little bit. And it's okay if you don't preserve the symmetry by keeping it folded all the time. Remember that sometimes it's nice to have two separate sides that don't exactly match, because then you can pick the side that actually ends up looking a little bit better, or the side that you like better in the future. So yeah, so now I just elongated it a little bit. It's a little bit longer. Yeah, I like that better. Okay, so now I have this pointed bracer shape. It looks kind of like what we got here, kind of, except this one has this dimensional curve to it, and I talked a lot about that during my pattern making. If you look at the profile of this piece of armor, it actually curves upwards. So if I put this paper into Worbla right now, the profile is a straight line. So we're going to cut those crescent shapes that I talked about into this pattern to give it that curve. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw that Nike swoop, like a Nike shaped swoop. So I want it to curve in this profile. So as you can see, this profile, it starts at the tip, it comes in deep, and then it kind of smooths out towards the top. So it's kind of going to be like a Nike swoosh. So I'm going to start at the tip, and then I'm going to curve inwards a lot at the wrist, and then I'm going to connect to the tip smooth, like a smooth slope to the tip. So there you have this Nike swoosh shape. I mean, it's not really a Nike swoosh, but you get kind of the idea. Alright, so there's my first cut, or my first alteration. So I'm going to make that cut. And one thing that I always suggest is that you make sure that, well, I didn't do it here, but I like to keep the tips connected so that I can make sure that the pattern is actually going to reconnect. But before you unfold it, I'll show you. This is the shape that comes out. Like I said, it's kind of like a little crescent shape. So before you open it up though, you should probably go ahead and tape the seam back together so that you know, kind of like we did with the Worbla, we stick the seams together. So this is kind of simulating what the Worbla would do once it's stuck together. We'll create the seam here. This is just a couple pieces of masking tape that I ripped. So as you can see, the profile now of the bracer has a curve to it. So if I put it on, it now has that curve that we were talking about trying to create. A lot of people might end here, so you could have these two pieces just curve around your wrist and you would have this swoop here. But I do have that extra detail that I wanted to add here, so basically I'm going to do the same thing. And see, this is why I added that extra inch or two, or I guess it's more like a centimeter or two on the side, is because I actually took out a little bit more than a centimeter or so in the actual pattern in order to create these curves. So just remember that if you're going to be pulling or creating these curves and taking pieces out, you need to make sure that you account for that when you're cutting your pattern out in the first place. So again, I'm just going to there, I did it on this one. You can see I left the tips attached. So you can see the little shape, but I'm going to go ahead and fold that and tape it back together. Alright, and here's what we have now. I put it on. You can see that it curves up from my wrist and it curves up from my arm. It goes about halfway down my arm, and it looks very, very similar to what I've created here. This Worbla piece has a couple extra shapes to it. For instance, this shape here, this bend, is from the Worbla. I was able to push and bend that shape into the bracer using the Worbla and the foam. You can see that I don't have that shape here, but it would be the same as if maybe you just kind of crease the paper a little bit. You can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. But that just takes experience of knowing your materials. If you're doing your bracer in something other than Worbla, if it doesn't take curves very well, like if you're using Sintra or PVC plastic, or maybe you're just sticking with foam, you can kind of heat form foam too. But if you're not using something that's heat formable, then maybe you'll just have to create extra crescents in order to create that shape. But yeah, there you go. That's kind of what your pattern looks like. And then when you're ready to cut out your foam and Worbla, like we'll do in part 1 of the tutorial for this bracer, you can use these pieces to create your foam underlayer that you sandwich inside of the Worbla. So there you go. I hope that kind of gave you a little bit of insight into what it takes to create a pattern and how I create my patterns. It's not that hard. It's actually pretty quick, so hopefully it takes a lot of the mystery out of it. So there you go. This is the pattern. You have the two pieces and then you flip them over to get the other two pieces. Because it's a symmetrical pattern, we've made them together. And as you can see, I didn't create these at the same time. This is a different pattern, but yeah, it's pretty dang close to what I just created in the Worbla. So again, I hope that kind of gives you an insight into what it takes to create a pattern and how I made the pattern, and just give you some ideas of what I mean when I say, yeah, no, I don't have the pattern, I just kind of cut paper and threw it together. Hey guys, that was part 0 of my Worbla bracer tutorial. Be sure to check out part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the Worbla bracer tutorial, where I teach you how to make this guy. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. If you have any things that you're having trouble crafting or making and you think I might have an idea for you, please put that below too. I'd love to help you out. I'll do my best to answer. Until next time, see you guys, bye. So this is my patterning part of tutorial for the Worbla bracer tutorial.